This morning we're going to be spending time with the classical figures, starting off with this panel on Plato and Augustine, with Mark Spencer, Dan Sheffler, and Martin Cajthaml. I believe Martin is taking us off first.
Okay, thank you very much. The idea was to speak about conversion, but to relate that to classical authors, Plato and Augustine, and so I'll try to do that, of course, very briefly. I'll start just with the concept of conversion in general, and then I'll move to Plato. The concept of conversion is, in its specific sense, a biblical concept. It is a central concept of Christian piety, and it involves two elements. First, a free action of God in respect to man, and second, man's conscious and freely chosen turning toward God. God descends to man by becoming man himself and by delivering man from his bondage to evil through the passion and the resurrection of Christ. And this is the specifically Christian notion of conversion. We all know it. I just thought it could be shortly stated here in the beginning. Now, this turning away from one's depravity, from one's being lost in the world, and turning or returning to God as a response to God's redemptive action is sometimes generally dramatic. And maybe the most iconic conversion of this kind is St. Paul's conversion. But there are some other famous conversions. Maybe the second most widely known and conversion is maybe that of St. Augustine, and we could think of many others. In this short address, I would like to turn your attention to the fact that a substantial, although not specifically, English is difficult, you have different, specifically Christian notion of conversion, is to be found already in the classical antiquity, particularly in the Platonic philosophical tradition. Now, the Platonic philosophical tradition goes back to Plato, obviously, the 4th century BC Athenian philosopher. You might ask the question, why is he relevant, although we have spoken about him? And you might ask the question, why is he relevant for our discussion today? And I will try briefly to answer these questions. To the first, just almost humorous point, you probably know that the famous or the well-known British philosopher Arthur North Whitehead wrote this famous sentence: the safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it consists a series of footnotes to Plato. And like the Italians say, se non è vero è ben trovato. So if it's not true, it's well taken. So it captures well the point. So arguably, Plato is the most important philosopher of our tradition. So that is to the question why he matters. But why does he matter for our talk now? Is he relevant to the question of conversion? I think he is, and I will try to explain why just very shortly. The term conversion, the term itself, comes from Latin. Conversio means literally turning around. And the term is a metaphorical expression. It denotes a fundamental spiritual event by means of an event occurring in the physical realm. And we have a lot of metaphorical expression of that type, like grasping, for example, etc. And Plato, in fact, seems to be the inventor of this metaphor, and therefore I think he is relevant here. In the most famous passage of all his works, in the image of the cave at the beginning of the book 7 of his Republic, Plato Socrates says about the prisoners in the cave that they are suddenly, I quote, freed from their fetters, they turn around their necks, literally, periagenton auchena, but it's being translated, they turn around their heads and lift up their eyes to the light. So here we have precisely this metaphor expressed in this physical, I mean, it's this whole passage is an allegory, it's a metaphorical expression. So although he's describing here a physical movement of the prisoners, This has, of course, a metaphorical meaning, and it's supposed to mean a fundamental turning around, fundamental conversion of human person. And this fundamental change of a person's life and attitude described in this famous passage consists in turning away from the illusionary, almost non-existent reality of the shadows, which the prisoners see, and they see only the shadows in the beginning. So the turning away from the shadows to the truly existing being, and ultimately to the most real being, the forms. For Plato, the image of the cave describes allegorically the meaning of human existence. That's why the passage is so relevant. Human life is ultimately, for Plato, it is about a delivery of man from illusion and error, about an arduous ascent from darkness to light, from falsity to truth, from depravity to goodness. We have to remind ourselves today, or in modern times, that Plato's philosophy is not philosophy in the modern sense of the term. It has a soteriological character. It is ultimately a doctrine of salvation, despite its profound and important intellectual side. And therefore, it requires, as a starting point, a genuine conversion of the core of the person. And we can say that the category or the allegory of cave is a metaphorical expression of this conversion. Now, this arduous ascent to truth, reality, and goodness described in the mentioned passage is possible, according to Plato, due to a particular type of intellectual skill. Plato calls it dialectics. However, Plato is also aware of the fact that no purely intellectual skill or capacity alone can bring about this fundamental change of one's life. And therefore, in Symposium, he speaks about desiring love, eros, as the power that leads man to truth, everlasting life, and to absolute reality. The priestess Diotima of Mantinea says there that man can satisfy his desire for a lasting possession of the good. This is the definition of eros, the desire for a lasting possession of the good. So man can desire this desire for a lasting possession of the good by engendering in beauty, tokos and kalo. And the power of desiring love allows man, says Diotima, to climb up the stairs of love, the scala amoris. And she describes very eloquently these stairs. They lead man from the individual to the universal, from the physical to the spiritual, from the sensible to the intelligible, and most importantly, from the transient into the perennial. And the high point of this ascent in Diotima's speech is the form of beauty, which is described in a form almost mystical vision. This Platonic motive, mediated through Neoplatonism, became the key inspiration of Augustine's account of love of God, caritas. Also, caritas is for Augustine a desiring love. It is the desire of the highest good, which is at the same time the most perennial and hence the most real being. It is the deep conviction of Augustine that only this highest good and being, God, is able to satiate the deepest desire of man's heart. And this is famously expressed in the phrase occurring at the very beginning of his confessions. Inquietum est cor nostrum donec requiescat in te. Our heart is restless until it rests in you. The question I propose for the discussion, I don't only want to throw things at you, but I want to propose for the discussion a question which is related to this desiring love and the beneficent, self-forgetting love. This latter love is revealed to us, as the 2nd and the 4th century church fathers taught, particularly in the incarnation, on the dogma of incarnation, and in Christ's passion on the cross. And its Greek name, which is used already by St. Paul and St. John, is agape. Now my question is whether we as Christians are summoned by God's grace to exercise the noble but still somewhat self-attached desiring love of God, caritas, or whether we are primarily called to imitate God's agape, revealed most radically, even paradoxically, in Christ's suffering on the cross. Another way how to ask this question: is our task to strive, with the help of grace, to achieve a sort of sublimation or transformation of eros, of desiring love, into the agape, into the beneficent love, or should we rather seek to maintain some types of desiring love in our lives as we strive for perfection? And if the latter is the case, should we cultivate only those pure and noble desires that arise not from the experience of some lack or deficiency, but from agape itself? I mean here especially the desire for the good of the other, for the other's sake, what Hildebrand called intentio benevolentiae. Or is there a room, to put it in this way, I put it this way, is there a room in the saint's heart also for desiring love in the sense of Plato's eros? I would like to propose it as a question for our discussion here. Thank you.
Well, I didn't read the text of Martin's specific questions that he just finished with, but I couldn't have paid him money to frame them in that precise language as a better setup.
You can do it later.
Yes, okay. So my talk is on Platonic eros and its role in conversion as a kind of motor, one of the motors that's driving us towards that radical change of our lives. Because we face this question, right? Where we read this readiness to change in the first chapter of Transformation in Christ, and that's a big deal. I mean, that's a really big deal. The proposition is that I need to be prepared to change every aspect of my life down to its very core. And as you can imagine, and as I'm sure we've all experienced at some level, there's a myriad different obstacles to that, places in our soul that pose resistance. And so just having a kind of dry knowledge that I ought to isn't going to be enough. I need some oomph. I need something that's driving me to that. Now, what I want to propose is that I don't want anybody to hear me as saying that the eros, the way that I'm about to describe it, is the only motor of conversion. We've already discussed in several places, and Martin just did a great job articulating some of that disinterested motives, beneficent motives. We've discussed already the role of values that appear to us in Hildebrand's thought as entirely disconnected from any good for me. They simply appeal as worthy in themselves. And often that can provide an extremely powerful, effective motor for conversion. However, I want to say that when we realize that, and when we have homilies preached on the importance of that kind of disinterested love for what's good in itself, we are often tempted towards the conclusion that therefore the other kinds of desire are bad, they're to be gotten rid of, or maybe we just simply stop thinking about them because we become much more interested in this other kind of motivational source in our psychology. And I want to say that that's a mistake, because I think that we are clearly designed at a pretty basic biological level, psychological level, to experience this lack eros, a desire that derives from lack. And I want to argue that it is a good thing, and thank God that He has designed us in this way. And it can be, and has been in the lives of many saints, a powerful catalyst for conversion, along with others. Now, when we say this word eros, okay, there's an immediate danger sign, okay, which is that, you know, what many of us in contemporary English hear is erotic, right? And what meaning does erotic have for us? It's the kind of maybe the section. If you see erotic as the label at the you know used bookstore, that's probably the section you don't want to be in, right? So it's a dirty word, you know. And clearly, it has eros has a clear sexual meaning. And this is true in Plato, in the ancient literature. Throughout it often has that specifically sexual meaning, and it has those sexual connotations. But it's important to realize that it's more than that. Okay, eros, this kind of desire that derives from lack, can be experienced with respect to very many things. And I'm going to argue in these passages that ultimately we want to move beyond just sexual desire, okay? However, I also want to say that it's not less than the specifically sexual eros, and that specifically sexual eros is not a bad thing, and in the right context, it too can be a powerful moment of conversion. You know, in a marriage, it's not as though we experience conversion in marriage just in the way that our spouse is a lovely friend and other person that we sit across the dinner table with. Those are all good things. But it's not as though that's where we experience the spiritual side of marriage, and then the sex is just this sort of like regrettable duty that we have to do, you know, over here on the side to procreate, right? All of that can be a part of the life of conversion if done in the right way. Although there are obvious dangers left and right with every part of eros. Now, I want to define eros before we go too much further and look at the passages. So eros is a basic psychological attitude that is intentional. Now, Hildebrand and phenomenologists generally use intentional in a precise way that's a little different than what we mean by that word in ordinary English. When I say, or when Hildebrand says that an attitude is intentional, it means that it's directed at a meaningful object. Okay? Intendo in Latin means to point. Okay? So I'm pointing a finger at something, and it's always a desire for something, and that something is understood. It's not a mere urge. Okay, so for example, if I itch, that is not an intentional attitude or an intentional psychological state. It's a mere urge to scratch somewhere. It's not directed at any meaningful object. Okay, it doesn't mean on purpose or subject to plan. That's typically in normal English when we say that something's intentional, right? We mean that it's, I'm doing it on purpose. I chose to do this, okay? Eros is not always that, right? And that's one of the more powerful features of it, is that sometimes it springs upon us and takes us unawares, okay? So it's intentional, therefore it's possible only for conscious, rational, reasonable agents. But frustratingly, it's not always responsive to our higher order reasoning, right? I'm sure we've all experienced this, where we have some very strong desire towards something, and we try to kind of talk ourselves down from that, and we maybe know at a higher level that, you know, it's not good to desire that particular thing. And over time, you can, as we've discussed in a previous talk, you can decapitate the power of those bad desires. But in the moment, it's not just immediately responsive to my will or my reason in the way that if I want to, you know, take a drink, I just simply will to pick up the coffee and, you know, there it goes. immediately obedient. Okay, so it has this kind of interesting middle ground. Okay, it is always characterized by a lack. I'm going to read some of the poetic passages from the Symposium here in a minute. But eros is always characterized by the recognition of some lack on my part, where the object of eros does not have that lack. Okay? So I realize that I am not generous. And I read a story of a saint who is generous, and I feel a strong urge in realizing that is between the lack of generosity on my part and the recognition of the fullness of generosity in the story of the saint. Okay, so it has that polarity of lack here and fullness there in the object. Now, crucially, it is not the desire to possess the fullness or to have it for myself. This is what Agathon thinks in the Symposium, and that understanding of just trying to get for me is problematized by Socrates there in the Symposium. I had a long conversation about this with a Buddhist philosopher colleague of mine a few years ago, and he said, "Oh, all you Christians and Platonists and the whole Western tradition, it's got a serious problem down at its core because you're all carrying around this bag, this hole of lack." And you're trying to see all these good things, food, sex, shoes, like Socrates says in the Phaedo, but even more noble things, virtues, excellences, and even God himself. And you're just trying to put it in your own little ego bag. But the problem is that the bag is bottomless and infinite, and you guys just need to stop having a bag. Okay. And I had to respond to my colleague that that's simply just a misunderstanding of this whole tradition of eros. It's not trying to get all the good stuff into me. Okay. Instead, beautifully, what Socrates says through the character of Diotima, the priestess, is that eros is the desire to give birth in the presence of the beautiful. So what happens is the person who has eros sees the fullness, specifically of beauty, but it could be another kind of plenitude, sees the lack on my part, and in the space between that lack and that fullness, there's a strong urge to create, to generate, to act, to bring into being something in the presence of that fullness, to grow myself towards that fullness. But it's ultimately a humble attitude, and it's ultimately, and when done rightly, is a kind of hands-off attitude towards that fullness. If I desire the beauty of my wife, obviously, I don't want to have her beauty myself, right? That's not what I desire. Okay, I don't want to just own my wife. I don't want to. It's a hands-off kind of attitude. I desire union with my wife, of course. I desire intimacy with her, but I ultimately want her to be her and to have the fullness of beauty and goodness that she has, that I see in her, and I want that to continue to be, and in fact to grow. Okay, so I want to read we're going to go through the Symposium, the Phaedrus, and some from Augustine's Confessions. So there's a beautiful little myth. Eros, by the way, is the name of a god in Greek mythology and religion. There are temples to Eros. And there's this beautiful little interchange where Socrates challenges this idea that Eros is a god, because he says, how could Eros be a god? Because what it means to be divine is to be full and to not be lacking anything. But the very nature of Eros is to be characterized by this recognition of lack. And so he says, so Eros can't really be a god. He has to be, at best, a middle spirit, a daemon, something like an angel that mediates between us and the gods. So where did this spirit come from, the spirit of Eros? Well, here's the myth. As the son of Poros, which means plenty, richness, and Penia, which means poverty, his lot in life is set to be like theirs. Okay? Sorry, I didn't copy down the myth itself. The myth is that at a dinner party of Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, Poros is there at the banquet because he is plenty. That's what his name means. But Penia, poverty, is coming along begging at the doors and just asking for the scraps of food from the banquet. And at this banquet, Poros and Penia get together, and they are the parents of Eros. So Eros is the child of plenty and poverty. And always within him are both of those bloodlines, so to speak. Okay? And so as the son of Poros and Penia, his lot in life is set to be like theirs. In the first place, he is always poor, and he's far from being delicate and beautiful, as ordinary people think he is. In the depictions, he's always this youthful boy, often an adolescent. Not a winged little baby, by the way, but an adolescent. Instead, he is tough and shriveled and shoeless and homeless, always lying on the dirt without a bed, sleeping at people's doorsteps and in roadsides under the sky, having his mother's nature, always living with need. But on his father's side, he is a schemer after the beautiful and the good. He is brave, impetuous, and intense, an awesome hunter, always weaving snares, resourceful in his pursuit of intelligence, a lover of wisdom through all his life, a genius with enchantments, potions, and clever pleadings. Okay? Because he has the resources of his father. Okay. So Diotima initiates Socrates into the divine mysteries of Eros, and how Eros is supposed to lead us from our world of wandering. I hope I'm getting that phrase that you used right. It was beautiful. To the divine. And this connects with our theme of contemplation yesterday. And there are seven rungs of this ladder. So the first rung is the immediate encounter with beautiful particulars. In this context, it's a beautiful, beloved person. But it could be a particular beautiful sight, a work of art, a sunset. Okay? But then, when he grasps this kind of beauty, he can't stop there. Such a lover must recognize that the beauty that he sees in this beloved, there are also other beautiful people out there. There are also other beautiful works of art. And so he must become, on the second rung, a lover of all beautiful bodies. And he must think that this wild gaping after just one beautiful thing is a small thing, and despise that. Then the third rung, after this, he must think that the beauty of people's souls is more valuable than the beauty of their bodies. So that if someone is decent in his soul, even though he is scarcely blooming in his body, our lover must be content to love and care for him and to seek to give birth to such ideas as will make young men better. Okay? So that beauty of soul and virtue is a higher thing even than the beauty of all the bodies in the world together, all the beautiful physical things. The fourth rung, though, if you love the soul, you're also going to love in an even more excellent way the things that contribute to the beauty of the soul. So the fourth rung is that our lover will be forced to gaze at the beauty of activities and laws, and to see that all this is akin to itself, and the result that he will think that the beauty of bodies is a thing of no importance. Okay? So the beauties of institutions, practices, laws, disciplines that make us beautiful. This leads to the fifth rung. After customs, he must move on to various kinds of knowledge. The result is that he will see the beauty of knowledge and be looking mainly not at beauty in a single example, but the lover is turned to the great sea of beauty. And notice here, it's important that it's multiple kinds of knowledge. It's epistemi, is plural. So this great sea of all the beautiful, eternal truths, things that we can know. And gazing upon this, he gives birth to many glorious, beautiful ideas and theories in unstinting love of wisdom, until he rises up higher than that sea of many beautiful eternal truths, beyond many to one. So the last rung, having grown and been strengthened there, he catches sight of such knowledge, and it is the knowledge of such beauty. Now try to pay attention to me, Diotima says. So she's telling you, stop, okay? We've been going up. This is the key. You see, the man who has been thus far guided in matters of love, who has beheld beautiful things in the right order and correctly, is coming now to the goal of loving. All of a sudden, he will catch sight of something wonderfully beautiful in its nature. That, Socrates, is the reason for all his earlier labors. First, it always is, and neither comes to be nor passes away, neither waxes nor wanes. Second, it is not beautiful this way and ugly that way, nor beautiful at one time and ugly at another, nor beautiful in relation to one thing and ugly in relation to another. Nor is it beautiful here, but ugly there, as it would be if it were beautiful for some people and ugly for others. Nor will the beautiful appear to him in the guise of a face or hands or anything else that belongs to the body. It will not appear to him as one idea or just one kind of knowledge. It is not anywhere in another thing, as in an animal or in earth or in heaven or in anything else, but just is itself, by itself, with itself. It is always this one form. And all the other beautiful things share in it in such a way that when those others come to be or pass away, this does not become the least bit smaller. This kind of beauty does not become the least bit smaller or greater or suffer any change. She tells him that here at the summit of that pursuit, that we began by recognizing the lack in us and then pursuing. So where's the fullness? So where's the fullness? Okay? There is life, Socrates, my friend, said the woman from Mantinea. There, if anywhere, should a person live his life, beholding that beauty. I hope you can see the correspondences to the contemplation passages we read earlier. Okay, so now turning to the Phaedrus. We got another very interesting set of ideas, a very similar kind of coming up to the heaven of beauty. In the Phaedrus, however, we began from that chariot image that I shared with you yesterday. You have the soul following its God, up to the highest rim of heaven, looking out, okay? But that's all before, in some kind of past life. Now, this is a myth, okay? So all of these myths don't take super literally. They're poetic representations. But somehow we have fallen away from that original condition of our soul, because the dark horse, remember there's a light horse and a dark horse, and the dark horse is rowdy and uncontrolled by our nous, by that core of our spiritual center. And so because of it, his wild impulses and appetites and uncontrolled passions, we have fallen now into this condition and forgotten what it was like to be there with the gods on the rim of heaven, looking out into eternity. Okay? So we need a reminder down here so that we can climb back up again to where we're supposed to be. Okay? So Socrates says at this point, now this takes me to the whole point of my discussion of the fourth kind of madness. Eros and the Phaedrus is the fourth kind of madness, which I think would be a great band name for the fourth kind of madness. He's enumerated three other ways in which we kind of go out of our senses or out of our ordinary, just kind of going through life. But this is the highest kind of madness. This is a divine kind of madness, he says. That which someone shows when he sees the beauty we have down here and is reminded of the true beauty. Then he takes wing and flutters in his eagerness to rise up. You see, when we fell, we lost our soul wings, the motive affectivity that drew us up and helped us to follow the gods up to the rim of heaven. And that's why we can't rise up again. We don't have those wings anymore. So we need to, the difficulty is we need to regrow the wings. Okay? And what happens is that when we catch sight of some beautiful particular thing, again, here in this context, it's specifically the face of the beautiful person that we're falling in love with, but it could be a beautiful painting, a beautiful passage of poetry, some beautiful thing in our experience. Okay, that reminds us of true beauty. And we start to take wing, and there's a fluttering as the wings start to grow. Okay? And we have this eagerness to rise up, but we can't do so yet. He gazes aloft like a bird, paying no attention to what is down below. And that is what brings on him the charge that he has gone mad. This is the best and noblest of all the forms that possession by God can take for anyone who has it or is connected with it. But not every soul is easily reminded of the reality there by what it finds here. Not souls that got only a brief glance at the reality there. Not souls who had such bad luck when they fell down here that they were twisted by bad company into lives of injustice, so that they forgot the sacred objects that they had seen before. Only a few remain whose memory is good enough, and they are startled when they see an image of what they saw up there. Then they are beside themselves, and their experience is beyond their comprehension, because they cannot fully grasp what it is that they are seeing. Justice and self-control don't shine out through their images down here so well. And neither do the other objects of the soul's admiration. The senses are so murky that only a few people are able to make out, with difficulty, the original of the likeness they encounter here. Okay? So all these other forms, justice, self-control, truth, wisdom, these things, some people might get startled when they see an example of justice, and that might quicken something in their soul. But it's hard to see. But beauty is different. Beauty is unique among all the other eternal forms. Because beauty was radiant to see at that time when the souls, along with the glorious chorus of the gods, saw that most blessed and spectacular vision and were ushered into the mystery that we may rightly call the most blessed of all. And we who celebrated it were wholly perfect and free of all the troubles that awaited us in time to come. and we gazed in rapture at sacred revealed objects that were perfect and simple and unshakable and blissful. That was the ultimate vision, and we saw it in pure light because we were pure ourselves, not buried in this thing we are carrying around now, which we call a body, locked in it like an oyster in a shell. Now, beauty, as I said, was radiant among the other objects. And now that we have come down here, we grasp it sparkling through the clearest of our senses. Vision, of course, is the sharpest of our bodily senses, although it does not see wisdom. It would awaken a terribly powerful love if an image of wisdom came through our sight as clearly as beauty does. And the same goes for the other objects of inspired love. But now beauty alone has this privilege to be the most clearly visible and the most loved. Of course, a man who was initiated long ago or who has become defiled is not to be moved abruptly from here to a vision of beauty itself when he sees what we call beauty down here. So instead of gazing at the latter reverently, he surrenders to pleasure and sets out in the manner of a four-footed beast, eager to make babies. And wallowing in vice, he goes after unnatural pleasure too, without a trace of fear or shame. A recent initiate from heaven, however, one who has seen much in heaven, when he sees a godlike face or bodily form that has captured beauty well, first he shudders, and fear comes over him like those he felt at the earlier time. Okay? So again, there's this whole myth of reincarnation that surrounds this and this experience that we've had before birth. But the deeper structure that I want to call attention to is this whole theme of homecoming. That we're returning, the experience of eros and the experience of returning back to beauty is the experience of coming home to what we were really made for. And I think it's voicing much the same sentiment as the famous line from Augustine, that our hearts are restless until it rests in thee, O Lord. That there's this sense that we have this lack, and that we're returning to what we really are. Now, I just want to briefly transition to the Confessions and then hand it off to Mark. Okay? Because I think in the Confessions, you see many of these similar themes in Book 8. Where Augustine has his famous conversion experience in the garden. Because prior to Book 8, we've gone through this long journey of Augustine's intellectual conversion away from Manichaeanism, away from academic skepticism. He's read some books of the Platonists, and this has converted him to search for the eternal, the true, and the beautiful. He has been converted intellectually by conversations with Ambrose to no longer think that the scriptures are full of childish fancies. And he's convinced of the goodness of Christianity. But again, that's not enough. He lingers. He can't bring himself to a full conversion because that would require the readiness to change. That would require him giving up his mistress. It would require him making a radical change of his career as the rhetorician in the court of the emperor. It would require him changing his whole status in life. And so he needs a motive, a whole series of motives, and an act of the will. He needs to bring himself to an act of the will to come to that readiness to change. And so what does it for him? Is it more intellectual conversations about the truth of certain Christian propositions? No. It's stories about saints, where he sees in concrete other people embodied beauty and fullness of goodness and holiness and righteousness in contrast to the lack that he has. And that quickens in him a powerful urge and a powerful desire to change. So I'm not going to go through all the details, but the first is that he goes and has a conversation with Simplicianus in the beginning of Book 8, who's the mentor of St. Ambrose, and sees in this old man this venerable, holy life, that he was able to do that. Over the course of that conversation, they talk about Augustine's conversion to Platonism. And Simplicianus says, this is great, because you are seeing something here that is beautiful, but it's not enough. It doesn't have Christ. It doesn't have humility. So you need to go further than the books of the Platonists. Let me tell you about a story about Victorinus, who is the guy who translated the books of the Platonists into Latin that Augustine read. And so Victorinus was this well-known intellectual in Rome who converted and became a Christian. And Augustine sees a mirror image in some ways of his own situation and says, that guy had something that I lack. He had that willingness to change. Why can't I be like that and give up my status in the kind of intellectual, professional world that I'm in? He did. Then later he is at a friend's house and hears the story of St. Anthony and the way that St. Anthony was able to give up all his riches and give up all his life upon hearing the word of the gospel in the liturgy. He said, "Why? I see a fullness there in St. Anthony that I don't have." And there's another story of a guy, Publicianus, who heard that story of St. Anthony and was similarly in the court of the emperor and gave it all up. And so Augustine, again, sees these guys have something. There's a beauty there. There's a holiness there. What about me? Where I see my lack. And it's that moment of eros that is the catalyst and is used by the grace of God to begin driving him towards this conversation that he has, that then eventually leads to the famous story in the garden of the Tolle Lege that probably we all know about. So I want to just suggest that has the structure of that Scala Amoris that we just read, although it doesn't look like exactly all the things that Socrates mentioned. All right, I'll shut up now and pass it on to Mark.
Thanks, Dan. A very rich text there from Plato, and then we've heard a bit here about Augustine's own conversion. What I want to do just briefly is introduce a couple of key concepts from Augustine from his reflection upon this conversion experience that Dan was just talking about. And I think this is particularly helpful because, as I sort of alluded to on the first day of this seminar, when we're thinking about our own conversion, it helps to have concepts. It helps to have names that we can put on things. It's incredible. I'm mystified by this, how you have some experience and it's kind of confusing, and if you can just put a word on it, it makes much more sense. You sort of now have a framework that you can relate it to other things. So I think turning to people like Plato and Augustine gives us a set of concepts which allows us to make sense of our own experience of conversion. And I just want to call attention to two things that Augustine talks about. First, the primacy of grace. And second, I want to talk a little bit about how not just eros, not just desire, but other powers that we have are transformed when we convert for Augustine. So first, briefly, the primacy of grace in conversion. This is a major theme in Augustine's works, and I think it's primarily a major theme because he experienced it. So when we talk about the primacy of grace, what that means is when we convert, when we turn towards the Lord, it is not our initiative that brings that about. It is not our own power that brings it about. I am not capable by my own natural powers of turning towards the Lord. Right? I am not capable of performing acts of virtue that are salvific. Right? I am not capable of faith. Rather, these things have to be received as a gift from God. And Augustine experienced that very concretely through the mediation of other people in hearing these stories of conversion. And in being drawn out of himself and having his desires and his perceptions transformed so that he could desire Christ and so that he could see the truth of the Scriptures. properly understanding conversion requires a proper doctrine of God. We're not going to be able to understand what's going on when we convert unless we understand something about who God is. So for Augustine, God is being itself. Right? All of these forms that the Platonists talk about, that Dan and Martin mentioned, for Augustine, God is these forms. God is goodness itself, beauty itself, being itself, justice itself, and so forth. And so God is prior to all things. He is above all things, and all other things exist because they are caused by him. And God causes each thing according to its proper mode. He causes trees as trees, and he causes dogs as dogs, and he causes our free will as free will. Right? So all things are in God, including our freedom. This means then that if we are going to make the free choice to turn towards God, we need to first receive the ability to do that. We need to first receive grace. Now, sometimes this idea of our freedom being first acted upon by God is taken in an extreme direction. So, for example, John Calvin in the 16th century took this in a very extreme direction in which I contribute nothing. My freedom contributes nothing. Rather, God just irresistibly saves me, right? Gives me this grace. And that's not the sort of experience that Augustine is articulating when he speaks about the priority of grace. Rather, grace comes in very concrete ways. It's not this sort of abstract mystical thing. It comes through hearing stories of saints. It comes through encountering people who have already converted. God acts through these created realities, and he thereby empowers my freedom so that I am able to make that choice to turn towards him. Hildebrand is fond of quoting a line. It comes up several times in Transformation in Christ and several times in other texts, that although God created us without our cooperation, he will not save us without our cooperation. And he draws that from one of Augustine's sermons. So this priority of grace is an empowering of our freedom, and it's an elevating of our freedom. Dan mentioned this idea of madness, mania, from the Phaedrus that Plato talks about. And we're familiar, of course, with lower forms of madness, like literal madness, mental illness, in which a person is sort of out of their senses, right? Out of their own control. And we're also familiar with other kinds of madness, the madness of eros, right? In which you fall in love with someone. You're caught up in that love, pulled out of yourself. So these are sort of lower forms of madness. Grace is a sort of higher form of madness. Right? I am caught up out of myself. I am raised above myself. I am enabled to believe things, right, that are above my natural power to believe. Right? I'm enabled to love in a way that is beyond my natural power to love. Right? I'm enabled to have eternal life, right? Deified life, which is certainly beyond my own natural power. So, although my freedom is called to cooperate, the initiative is entirely on God's part. God catches me up to himself, which is clearly Augustine's experience in his own conversion, and in an interesting way, Plato's experience in his conversion to philosophy as well. Now, transitioning to my second point that I wanted to mention briefly, in catching us up, in empowering our freedom, grace doesn't just sort of elevate our desire so that now we desire not just sort of the abstract God of Plato, but Christ, right? Embodied goodness and beauty. And it doesn't just transform our freedom, right? It's not just freedom, not just desire. It transforms all of our other powers as well. And specifically, I want to call attention to a theme in Augustine. Augustine is part of a tradition you find throughout the Fathers and the medieval Christian thinkers, which is sometimes referred to now as the spiritual senses tradition or the spiritual perception tradition. So the idea here is when we come to have a life of faith, when we come to convert, we learn to perceive the world in a new way. This was alluded to yesterday in the panel on liturgy. The liturgy The reading of Scripture, the encounter with the lives of the saints, transforms our senses. We see things differently. Right? We learn to see what looks like bread and wine as the body and blood of Christ. Right? We learn to see ordinary human actions as acts of charity, right? As acts of divine love. Right? We learn to hear the deeper meaning in the Scriptures, right? In these wacky parables that Jesus tells, some of which are kind of bizarre and outlandish and kind of make no sense. Naturally speaking, like you leave all your flock of sheep and go off after one, and you learn to hear the deeper divine meaning within these stories. So in conversion, we have a transformation of perception in a very concrete way, brought about through these concrete encounters with grace. St. Augustine, and maybe it's the most famous passage in the Confessions, he expresses this spiritual perception tradition, and I just want to read this brief passage. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. Late have I loved you, O beauty ever ancient, ever new. Late have I loved you. You were within me, but I was outside, and it was there that I searched for you. In my unloveliness, I plunged into the lovely things which you created. You were with me, but I was not with you. Created things kept me from you. Yet if they had not been in you, they would not have been at all. You called, you shouted, you broke through my deafness. You flashed, you shone, you dispelled my blindness. You breathed your fragrance on me. I drew in breath, and now I pant for you. I have tasted you. Now I hunger and thirst for more. You touched me, and I burned for your peace. So we have this transformation through the encounter with the beauty of Christ, this transformation of all of our senses. Right? Now the very way in which we see and hear and taste and touch and smell is informed by our faith, right? Informed by this turning towards true beauty. The other, and I'll just mention this briefly, the other place in which this transformation of our powers shows up is in Augustine's reflection on what it means for us to be in the image of God. And Augustine is probably the theologian, at least in the Western tradition, who has reflected most and most deeply on what it means for us to be in the image of God. And on Augustine's view, to be in the image of God, he says, well, what does this mean? God is a trinity. So where is there a trinity in me? Right? Where are there three things which are also one thing in me? And he finds it in these acts we perform of remembering, knowing, and willing or loving. Right? First, I remember, I grasp who I am. I grasp who God is. I recover that knowledge because God is already in me, and so it's something that I can remember. It's something that's there to recall. So I grasp, I remember who God is, who I am, what true happiness is. And then I express this in knowledge, just as the Father expresses the Word, the Son. Right? And then having come to expressly know who I am, who God is, what true happiness is, now I come to love and desire and will these things. Right? So here, in my one soul, in my one mind, I have these three acts, right, which are related to one another, much as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are. Now, naturally speaking, just on the normal human level, we can do these things, right? Anyone can do this. You can run arguments for people, and they can come to know about God, and they can think about happiness, and come to have some sort of desire for this, as, say, Plato did. But what conversion, true Christian conversion does, is it transforms that image. Right? Now I remember God, not just in a sort of vague, philosophical, natural sense. Right? I remember the true God, right? The God who is Trinity, the God who is incarnate in Christ. And I come to express in the words of faith who that God is and who I am before him. And I come to love and desire God thereby. And Augustine talks about this as a transformation of the image of God into us into a true likeness of God. in us. Now we have become like God, right? And God is now more truly within us. So just a couple of concepts there that I think help make some sense of what Christian conversion is like. Hopefully we've all experienced that, but this sort of puts some words on it that sort of map out the contours of what's going on there. Thank you.
We got the microphone coming.
The beauty of the soul. Thank you very much for that presentation on Plato. In the year of St. Joseph, I was reading his life from a private revelation by Mary Cecilia Bargi. And she said, our Blessed Mother had the opportunity to see his soul, and it was very beautiful because he was adorned with three things. Virtue, which comes from doing the good consistently, graces from prayer, and merits from doing or bearing suffering innocently, willingly and lovingly. Bishop Barron would often say, the new evangelization is to go, if it's to go successfully, is to go by the via pulchrum, by the way of beauty. We have more beauty salons in the world. We have many beautiful churches. What would you say could be the method by which we could emphasize more of the beauty of the soul, emphasize the beauty of the church to truly be the most beautiful salon, because the soul is that which truly matters than the physical beauty that seems to be the priority nowadays in society? How can the new evangelization truly be beautiful, conveyed to society more than the beauty of the art, which is in a way part of the way of conveying the message? But we have beautiful churches, but without people, so you cannot be limited to the artwork themselves. So how can the church truly be that means of bringing conversion as by the via pulchrum, simply put? Thanks.
That's a great question. So in the ladder of love and in the whole tradition that kind of follows it, there's a easy mistake that can be made, because Socrates says at a couple points, once you get up to this higher rung on the ladder, you're going to see that first rung where you started, the physical beauty, as of little. It's little by comparison. Okay, and the mistake is to therefore think that you need to leave behind that whatever's on the first rung, or in fact maybe actively go out of your way to make it ugly, right? So that you can really affirm your commitment to the higher spiritual beauty and ultimately the beauty of God alone. And I think that that's simply a mistake. How can a lover of the beauty of the soul, how could that truly motivate a person to go and, for example, make a church sanctuary, actively go out of his way to make it more ugly, right? How could the love of beauty be a motive for that? Now, of course, in the poverty of our resources, sometimes we do the best that we can, and I'm not speaking that, but I think there's sometimes this idea that I need to destroy what's already beautiful in order to pursue the higher beauty, and I think that that's a mistake. I think the present concrete beauty can persist even as we rise up that ladder to continually be an instigation and a continual reminder, because we always need that further reminder.
If I could add to that too. So I think I agree with Bishop Barron that the way of beauty is a powerful means of conversion, and I guess I believe it because I've seen it work, like with my own students and others that I've talked to. But I think there's something missing on the ladder of love here, right? We start by seeing the beauty of physical things, and then we're sort of off to the races. Then we get moving here. And I think there's a step before that. And I think this is where the new evangelization, the way of beauty and so forth comes in. So we've got these beautiful churches, and nobody's in them, right? Nobody's being moved by the beauty there. And we've got the stories of the saints of the past, converts today, and they're beautiful stories. They're moving stories. And where are the people being moved by this beauty? And so I think the step before that is the beauty needs to be pointed out. You can't really see and be moved by beauty unless you have some initial transformation of your perception. A lot of people, and again, I just very concretely, I see this in my students, a lot of people have trouble seeing beauty. They've become resistant to seeing it. And so I think the first step is help people see that. And a big part of helping people see that is pointing it out and making them spend time with it, and indicating to them why it is beautiful and what they should be seeing in what they're looking at, right? I mean this very concretely, take people into churches and point things out to them and explain things to them, because people are not going to see the beauty unless they've got the right concepts and the right sort of orientation of their vision. So if I could propose that as a sort of zeroth step, right, that sort of, or before the first step, then people can start to see beautiful bodies, beautiful physical things, and then they can start to see the beauty of soul, and then maybe we can start moving along there. But I think that's where this sort of aspect of the new evangelization really needs to be doing its work, get people to listen, to think about, and see where the beauty is.
Just to jump in real quick, I think also not just like an individual teacher pointing out the beauty, but cultivating an ethos or culture in which beauty is regularly valued and pointed out. My own view is that the world wars devastated our culture of valuing beauty for a lot of social reasons, okay? And I would love to have a longer conversation about exactly the history here and how it worked out. But we find ourselves in this position in the post-war European West where we have actually an anti-beauty culture, because that is thought to be more true to the gritty reality of a species that could do such things as the Somme or the concentration camps. I think it's absolutely vital that we kind of cultivate amongst ourselves and amongst our students that broader ethos.
This will be our last question.
So it's not as much a question, but just sort of continuing the conversation and sort of a response to your question. I think from a personalist perspective as well, there's a beauty of the person when we're becoming persons that you don't really have to show people. I think it's one of the most noticeable forms of beauty that people just get when someone is coming out of themselves in love, for example. That's just an immediate sense of beauty that we get, and that form of beauty, I think, is one of the things that can open our culture up to other forms of beauty afterwards. And so I think maybe there's a primacy to the sort of personal aspect of beauty. And even from the perspective of metaphysics and creation, beauty it's a call, but not from a Platonic perspective of some ultimate good that's can't respond, but it's the call of a loving personal God. And so when you add that personal aspect of things and realize what lies at the end of beauty, I think maybe we can have a better perspective, I guess, as a response to your question. So maybe there should be an emphasis on the action of the person to become beautiful. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when I talk about pointing out beauty, I think maybe the best way this can be done is with personal witness, right? Let them see your beauty, right? Let them see the beauty of your life, the beauty of your love for beauty. The beauty of the person is sort of the primary beauty on a personalist perspective. And so that seems like a crucial aspect of this evangelization.
Maybe just the last point, because you spoke about this pointing, but as long as someone is unable to see the beauty, this pointing will be pointless. So it ultimately goes back to spiritual healing of a person, of being able to overcome often unconscious sources of this blindness. Hildebrand, in his theory of value blindness, says many interesting things about what are the different causes of value blindness. There are different forms of value blindness, and the specific thing about value blindness is that you are not really aware. It's not that you don't want to see the value, but you just don't see. You don't see it, and so it seems to me that one of the problems today is that. And so as long as people won't have this spiritual healing, and you could say it's not only spiritual, but of course also culture has to do a lot with how they are brought up in the families, etc. So it's a whole very complex process which really cannot be decided on a political level, cannot be decided even on a level of some kind of cultural fight. Only in personal contacts, on the most personal level, piece by piece with each individual. So that makes it so difficult, because otherwise you could make a big program with a lot of money and you could change the world, but that is not possible.
Thank you all.